morning, everyone. It's a pleasure for me to be the chair of this very interesting session. Today is the second session of the European Union Asia Pacific Dialogue, Fostering Synergies on Global Challenges. And as you know, this is part of the conference that it was going to take place in Bilbao, but unfortunately, due to the COVID-19 situation, is being hosted as a webinar. Anyways, it's a great pleasure for us to welcome you into this network. Well, yesterday the key partners were presenting, and today we are going to have the presentation of some PhD students, but also doctors about EU-Asia Pacific relations. Just very briefly, just to introduce myself, I work very closely with Beatriz for now, I would say not many years, but several years, let's say. In that way, we don't seem that old. She was my PhD supervisor, and now I am an assistant professor here at the University of Deusto. So I have the pleasure to be one of the key researchers that is working with her in this Jean Monnet Network. I love Jean Monnet Networks. Beatriz knows that because I'm part of two more networks. One is about EU law enforcement. If some of you is interested in this, I strongly encourage you to check it out. So EU law enforcement is a network that is coordinated by Utrecht, the University of Utrecht. I'm also a member of another network coordinated by Professor Christian Kaunert in South Wales, and he's focusing on analyzing EU counter-terrorism. So if some of you are interested in this, I strongly encourage you to check these networks. Anyways, without further ado, just a very brief reminder for those of you who are presenting today that there are a lot of people who are going to be presenting. So I will be very strict or very British in terms of time management. So you only have 10 minutes. And then we are going to have some room for debate at the very end of the session. So everybody will be presenting. And then at the very end, we're going to reserve hopefully around 30 minutes for debate. And the session is scheduled to finish at 11:30 a.m. Spanish time. I'm not going to be able to say it in Japanese time, New Zealand time, but more or less 11:30 a.m. Spanish time, whatever time is in the rest of the world. So thank you very much, thank you very much for all of you to join today. And our first speaker is going to be Belen Garcia Noblejas. She comes from la Universidad Autónoma de Madrid. She's a PhD candidate there. And her paper is entitled Discourse on Legitimacy, Threat Perception and Challenges to China, EU Counter-Terrorism Cooperation, Xinjiang as a Case of Study. So Belen, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, David, for the introduction. Let me first share my PPT so everyone can see it. And thank you all of you as well for being here and for giving us this opportunity to share our research with you. My research for today, my presentation, is based only partially on my PhD since we have very limited time. So it's based on discourse and legitimacy and the threat perception by China in order to see how we can actually optimize our potential for cooperation. So why is this important? This is important because if we don't understand the perspective of the country we are studying, we cannot cooperate with them properly. So we need to know these to find cooperation areas and also the red lines that we cannot cross. First, my research design is based on critical terrorism studies as a theoretical framework. And it is based on the idea that the concept of terrorism is subjective, and therefore it depends as well on the perception of the place where it's taking place. And that if we are studying China, we first need to take into account the characteristics and local conditions of China, in this case, knowing that it's a party-state system and that the threat of terrorism is embedded within a broader term, which is known as the three evil forces, that also includes separatism and extremism, which is very well differentiated from the side of the European Union. So in order to provide this research and to do this research, I used 20 official documents in total. And here I'm going to be talking mostly on the Xinjiang white papers. And as methodology, I used a synergy, a combination of quantitative and qualitative research and analysis, focusing more particularly on Van Leeuwen theory. This scholar spoke about the discourse as a legitimacy tool. So first, as a result of the corpus linguistics analysis or the quantitative analysis, I'm showing you here the evolution of the application of these three terms, part of the three evil forces in the Chinese discourse, Xinjiang white papers. And we can see how at the beginning, terrorism and separatism were used together, while this tendency decreased at the same time that the combination between terrorism and extremism within the discourse increased. Which runs parallel to the European discourse, in fact, or the international discourse. But we need to keep in mind that the separatist part or aspect is still present. In terms of the corpus critical discourse analysis, I used the process which is called the open coding process, which implies basically a line-by-line analysis and a codification of every single document, creating this way codes for every category, creating my own codes. That's why it's open coding. And I ended up with 158 codes under which I categorized different references. And of course, I have to classify all these codes within broader categories. And I ended up with 4 main categories. But for this presentation, I'm going to be focusing on metaphors as moral evaluations of actors and actions. I'm using metaphors in this particular case because it's very eloquent and very direct and very also interesting. So we find many metaphors, mainly 5, but again, since we have limited time, I'm going to be focusing mostly on 2, which are more related to the current time and the application in the discourse today. So these are the last 2, threat as mental poison and the threat as mental shackles. If we look at all these metaphors, they all share characteristics of the threat as a foreign threat, which implies coming from the outside inwards, also the proliferation of the threat coming from the root, yeah, and then also an ideological aspect of the threat. And finally, the vulnerability of the victims, which imply the need for external help. And who's going to be the helper? The government. So we have this idea of the root cause and then the spread of the threat, which implies the need for preventive measures that we're going to be talking about. So I'm going to, with your permission, I'm going to skip the 3 first, and I'm focusing on the 2 last metaphors. The first one has to do with extremism as a mental poison, which makes basically the people losing their capacity to think properly. As a result, they need to be helped. They need to be re-explained, let's say, or reconducted into normal life. I know I'm being very fast, but I want to, be clear and I do not want to surpass the time limit. When we talk about extremism as mental shackles, we have this idea of extremism, religion extremism, depriving people from freedom. And this is also related to human rights in the sense that it is the terrorists, extremists, and separatists who deprive or who violate human rights. And therefore, the government is going to be helping to recover these human rights for the people. So it's shifted, right, the discourse. Also, we can see the focus on the need to strengthen Chinese language, the knowledge of modern science, education in general, employment capacities and professional training, and so on, in order to shield potential victims from the threat of extremism. And this is the preventive aspect that we were talking about. That is why, I don't know, probably most of you have heard of the polemic education and vocational training centers in Xinjiang in the last years. So all this is, the discourse is legitimating these centers, taking into account the the actual conditions, the local conditions of Xinjiang and China, and it is also legitimating it through these reasons that we were saying, like the root causes of the problem and the threat, the representation of the threat. So as we can see in this slide, we see how it's also legitimated through the success of these measures, right? So these measures are rational, these measures are moral, and they are effective. Even the people in these centers, according to the discourse, are agreeing, and they thank education and training in these centers. There is a focus on the youth, there is a focus on reintegration into society, and once again, I'm focusing on the local conditions. We can see in the last paragraph how the local conditions determine the need for particular measures. And as well, the experience from other countries. China is learning from other countries, which also legitimates these actions. So if we look at this, we can see also how the parallelism with international papers on this matter, international documents, official documents in this matter, and we see this parallelism between the discourse in China focusing on unemployment, the need for professional development, education, the youth. And we see in the UN Plan of Action to Prevent Violent Extremism, which is actually the main document that the discourse, the Chinese discourse, is actually at this moment inspired on. And we see again, poverty, unemployment, education as background causes of violent extremism. On the other hand, when we see at the European Union, or when we look at the European Union, we see how extremist ideologies need to be prevented. They need to be handled in the root causes through education, again, social inclusion, the understanding of the local context, creating new opportunities and so on. So we see how the Chinese discourse in the last years have been running parallel, you know, in the counter-terrorism discourse has been running parallel to the international discourse as well. So since I only have 1 minute left, I'm just finishing very quickly with the conclusions. As similarities, we are seeing how China has been shifting as well as the international community towards prevention and root causes. Also the focus on education, the youth, the need to handle poverty issues and developing professional capacities. But as differences, we've got the normative differences in the ground at the basis, we see, which are that concept of the three evil forces in contrast to our differentiation between the three. And still the separatist aspect of the threat in China, which we do not consider. Also, the more collective approach of preventive measures that are handled or that are implemented in China versus a more targeted implementation of measures in Europe. And again, this differentiation that you might have realized that China focuses more on the potential of cognitive radicalism and rather violent radicalism. So China, the element of violence is not indispensable or determinant necessarily in the Chinese context, at least in front of the discourse. So that would be it, 10 minutes. And thank you very much for listening.
Well, I truly appreciate Belen strictly sticking to the time. That makes the work or the job of the chair much easier. So I truly appreciate that. By the way, it was a very interesting paper that you were able to convey the message in 10 minutes in a very well.
Very complex manner. And
yeah, we'll move to the next speaker, who is who is Rosa Ricoy. She comes from the Universidad de Vigo, where she's a doctor in law as well as lecturer. And today she's going to be presenting her paper that is entitled Digital Currencies and Cryptocurrencies, a Necessary Dialogue Between the EU and Asia-Pacific, the Future of the Global Governance Monetary System. It sounds extremely appealing. So Rosa, the floor is yours.
Okay, hello. Sorry for my English. This is an initial work that I hope to develop so comments to improve it are very welcome. It's also difficult to condense everything I would like to comment on in 10 minutes. Sorry. The second positive, I don't, okay. Currently, great development of cryptocurrencies. They are cryptographic currencies to use mathematics and advanced computer techniques of cryptocurrencies, a new type of asset or virtual currency such as Bitcoin. Bitcoin, this is virtual currency, originates in 2009 as a means of payment by Satoshi Nakamoto. It operates with blockchain technology. Bitcoin represents more than 60% of the total market capitalization in the virtual currency market. Although some cryptocurrencies such as Bitcoin have limits on the issuance of their total number, there is no limit on the various cryptocurrency grants that could be issued. And currently there are more than 2,000 different cryptocurrencies. This type of virtual currency is not endorsed or regulated by any issuing entity, for example, the government or a central bank, and therefore this is defined as a encrypted and anonymous currency. The European Central Bank does not consider Bitcoin a currency, considering that a currency must be a reliable store of value, in the sense that citizens have to be certain that with the money they have today, they will be able to buy about the same things tomorrow or a year from now. And potentially useful tool for illicit activities such as money laundering, tax evasion, used for the purchase and sale of illegal products and the financing of terrorist groups. The fact that Bitcoin has been capped at 21 million since its inception makes it a fair asset with great appreciation potential. That Bitcoin or any other cryptocurrency lacks an intrinsic value like that of gold and is not backed by a state, such as sovereign currencies make its price determined exclusively by supply and demand, a speculative asset. The expansionary and contractionary monetary policies used by governments to control different economic situations could not be carried out on an economy that uses mainly Bitcoins. Therefore, it will have repercussions on price stability, the proper functioning of payment systems, the conduct of monetary policy, and the stability of credit institutions and the financial system, as well as their supervisory capacity and the law exclusive of the International Bank of the European Union to see based currency. At the moment, the trading volumes are not large enough to destabilize currency EBC, such as the European one, but this could change in the future with the euro or another currency. The other big concern is the government's inability to tax Bitcoin. Bitcoin has reached a new historical maximum in April 2021 above $65,000. 2.5 times what the Nasdaq itself is valued at a platform. Its capitalization in April 2021 is $914,578 million. Following approval by UC Security and Exchange Commission, the April 2021 of Coinbase, the first time a crypto company has done so, the world's leading cryptocurrency seller. All of this shows the rise of digital currencies and forces us to reconsider their role in the future. China is becoming the fintech dragon. In 2015, China announced a plan, the strategy to become a technology world power in a lot of thematics made in China. It is the first step in a 30-year global program in which the country's authorities will apply policies favorable to the restructuring of traditional industry. For example, lead in innovation in 2045. China is becoming to the dragon of fintech. They offer services not performed or poorly provided by banking entities. The Chinese government gave the teach giants for freedom, regulation, and privacy than the USA of the European Union. And they are done almost at no cost and quickly, even immediately. Comfort, ubiquity, record of internet users in 2017 with 772 million internet users, only in China, potential users, representing a digital ecosystem larger than the entire population of Europe and a growing middle class. There are a lot of important things about machine vision, market intelligence, integration of large digital companies in the state strategy has increased, and the government puts each of them and the head of national innovation platforms, for example, Beidou, Alibaba, for smart cities, etc. In Europe, the expansion of big tech companies could make us dependent of technologies governed elsewhere. Opacity, unilateral commercial conditions, and abusive clauses justify the proliferation of public solution actions. In June 2019, Facebook announced its own cryptocurrency called Libra, with a subsidiary company, Calibra, its virtual wallet, to be used through two social networks, WhatsApp and Messenger. It was offered in order for its value to remain stable thanks to the support of banks and electronic commerce companies, linking to different international currencies. Initially, it had the banking of companies such as Visa, MasterCard, Vodafone, etc. But in the United States, they asked Facebook to stop the launch of the cryptocurrency. The antitrust regulators of the European Union investigated the matter, and France pointed out that threat to the monetary sovereignty of the European Union, privacy, commerce were also questioning national security, monetary policy, etc. And this determined to lose the support of important companies. Likewise, the USA Federal Reserve declared that Libra cast doubt on the financial and banking system worldwide. Competition from China and other countries is causing them to reconsider their position and their strategic. Meanwhile, China already testing its own cryptocurrency. It's called DCEP, Digital Currency Electronic Payment, and it is the same state that creates its the People's Bank of China. It is own regulator. For of this bank had already started testing on mobile phones in 2020. Also, the electronic payments giant and financial and the well-known operator Tencent are involved in this deployment. And mobile payments can be made even without connection to data networks. Just to use efficiency technology. In addition, the mobile will not have to be linked bank account, something fundamental that we allow even people who do not have access to the banking system to have their DCEP wallet and access to digital currency. And this is
sorry to interrupt. The time is running up, so if you have 1 more minute for conclusions.
Okay. And which can make it an alternative to the traditional international payment system compared to the current one led by the United States with the USA. And for now, the only one with a digital currency with just a click on the mobile. The race for digital currency, many central banks around the world prepare their digital currencies within the world, and cryptocurrency technology developments, online purchases with the growing use of electronic banking to make payments, for example, in Japan, or in addition, Central Bank of South Korea, or also Hong Kong Monetary Authority and the Bank of Thailand. And it's possible digital euro at the moment is possible under the control of the euro system with light risk, not being a speculative currency as it has backing of the European Central Bank. Europe Union must create entities for supervision, control, and where appropriate sanction, and it could promote the international role of the euro is possible. Yes, final. The commercial bank can be the official distributor of wallets prepared to receive the currency. Limits can be placed on the holding of digital euros, the type of payments with this currency or the volume of payments. I remain at your disposal for any comments or questions. I'm sorry. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rosa, very much. And I'm sorry that I have to be so strict in terms of time management, but otherwise it will be very difficult to keep the time and give everybody at least the 10 minutes to interview. Okay. So please, I remind the speakers of today to stick as much as possible to the 10 minutes, although I will give you a reminder if your time is running up. We move to the next presentation and to the next ex-speaker, who is Ana Gascon. She comes from the University of Zaragoza. She's a doctor in law and she's a lecturer in this university. Today, she's going to be presenting about Japan and the European Union, natural allies for the international regulation of e-commerce. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. First of all, let me thank the organizers of this really interesting conference for letting me participate. And as the moderator has said, I will be speaking about Japan and the EU natural allies for the international regulation of e-commerce. I will speak briefly about the importance of e-commerce, how it's being regulated in the World Trade Organization, different state approach, and how this has been reflected in the recent free trade agreements in the Indo-Pacific, to finish with short conclusions. Probably it's not necessary that I explain to you that e-commerce is increasing its importance every day. We can see here the statistics in Europe, how the last 10 years has steadily increased. And obviously this has really boomed with the COVID-19 pandemic. So the World Trade Organization started to look into e-commerce at the end of the 90s with a work program on e-commerce, but to be honest, not much progress has been achieved. Only to mention that there is a moratorium on custom duties on electronic transmissions. This lack of progress was the reason to launch a joint statement initiative on electronic commerce in 2017 and a new one in 2019. And what's the point of this? Japan, Australia, and Singapore, as you can see, the Indo-Pacific has leadership here, co-convene this initiative in order to modernize the World Trade Organization framework in relation to e-commerce and its particular challenges. Currently, there are 86 states that are participating in the negotiations. The problem is that there is wide agreement on some topics like banning spam or recognizing electronic signatures, but there is also very strong disagreement on some points. And here I will focus on data flows and data localization and also forced transfers of technology, but there is other points where there is conflict, like imposition of custom duties and internet taxes, or obviously internet censorship. So we see some very different approach from the main superpowers. The USA approach, it's a very liberal one. They want free data flow. They want to ban data localization. They want to ban forced transfers of technology. They believe in internet freedom, no internet taxes, no intermediary liability. And that may be because the USA is a very liberal country, or because many of the tech giants that take advantage of this lack of regulation are from the United States. I let you decide. What do you think? Then we have China, which obviously is in the complete other extreme. They have data localization. For the ones who are not familiar with this term, data localization roughly means that Chinese data has to stay in servers in the territory of China. And this makes a lot easier to the authorities to access all that information. So there's also very strong government control over the internet. And if you want to make a business in China, you have to let them take a look at your source code, your algorithms, your cryptographic keys, and so on. So they have forced transfers of tech. And what I want to say in this presentation is that there is a possible third way. And I see this possible third way in the role of the EU and maybe also Japan and some of the countries of the Indo-Pacific. The EU and also Japan believe in the free flow of data and ban data localization and data transfers, but with safeguards. This means, for example, that the EU wants to still apply the GDPR, and Japan has even coined its own concept, which is data free flow with trust, which means free data flow for e-commerce, but with protection for copyright, for privacy, and for cyber security. We can see this in the agreement between EU and Japan, because it bans forced transfers of technology. It does not regulate free flow of data, because for the EU, this is a fundamental right. So we didn't want to include it in a trade agreement, but we did something that has the same consequences, which is to recognize that Japan has an essentially equivalent level of protection for personal data, and that makes that there is free data flow between the EU and Japan. They did the same, and as we are speaking about the Indo-Pacific, it's going to happen the same with South Korea in the next month. So how this translates to actually the trade agreements in the Indo-Pacific and of the Indo-Pacific countries. First, I wanted to speak about the USA-Japan Digital Trade Agreement. It's not a general trade agreement, but a digital trade agreement. And here we see the very liberal approach of the US. It's very similar to the agreement between the US, Mexico, and Canada, and it's this liberal approach. But what happens with the other free trade agreements in the Pacific? And here I want to speak mainly about the Comprehensive and Progressing Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, which has all these members. And there we see a very clear also influence of the United States because even if it's not a party, it was a part of the negotiations of the TPP. It bans transfers of source code, it bans data localization and free flow of data, but, and here it's a very important but, there are possible exceptions if you can prove that you are limiting all this because of a legitimate objective of public policy. Then we have the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, which is focused on the Indo-Pacific, but with the big difference that China was one of the negotiators. This has a huge impact because, as you can see, there is no mention, of course, of banning forced transfers of technology because it was not okay for China. And there is actually a couple of articles that ban data localization and opt for free flow of data, but, this is a huge but, there is very wide exceptions. So maybe they can do as they want because on top of that, the enforcement is almost impossible. So coming to my conclusions, not to make the moderator angry, I just wanted to say that e-commerce is increasing its importance every day, that we have to regulate it, we cannot ignore it anymore. The negotiations in the World Trade Organization are very difficult. I mean, we will have some results before the summer, but there is a wide range of agreement on some topics, but a big conflict on others, as we have seen. So probably we need to decide if we want more countries or a deeper agreement. So one of the two. And then, as you have seen, there is wide controversy around free flow of data, data localization, and for transfers of technology. And I believe that here the EU and Japan and probably other countries of the Indo-Pacific, like New Zealand, South Korea, or Australia, can offer a third way between the USA liberalism and China's strong control. Still, I believe we should also try to find common ground with the United States because our shared core values. But what I wanted, my last phrase and the last thing I wanted to say is that I believe we are approaching trade negotiations sometimes just as trade negotiations, but when we regulate the openness of the internet or privacy, data protection, this can have a huge impact in our capacity to regulate human rights internally. So we should approach all these negotiations, not make a balance between trade and human rights, but approach human rights approach trade from a human rights perspective. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Anna, very much. And I'm actually not angry. I'm very happy that you were able to finish even 1 minute earlier than the time that you had allocated. So, I mean, it's my role today. I have to be the bad guy telling you how much time you have left. So thank you very much for your presentation. It was very interesting. Thank you. Next speaker also comes from the University of Zaragoza. She's a PhD candidate there. She's Paula Cisneros Cristobal, and she's going to be talking today about a new era in Japan-European Union relations, the challenge of walking together in the middle of a crisis in multilateral cooperation. Paula, the floor is yours. Paula, you have the microphone off. Oh.
Sorry.
No worries.
Good morning. First of all, thank you very much for the opportunity of being here today and present our work. Without further delay, I start with my brief presentation. I have entitled my paper, A New Era in Japan-European Union Relations, the challenge of working together in the middle of a crisis in multilateral cooperation. Despite the rising global tensions, Japan and the European Union have deepened their cooperation. The economic and the strategic partnership agreement are the most prominent expression of the willingness of both partners to cooperate in an even deeper and more structured way. The reality is that both agreements took the already long history of European Union-Japan relations to a new level. On the one hand, we have the economic partnership agreement that entered into force in 2019, making a turning point in trades. The reality is for decades, trade between the two powers had been characterized by high sectorial tariffs and non-tariff barriers. And the economic agreement includes interesting new issues such as provisions on sustainable development or public procurement. And on the other hand, we have the strategic partnership agreement in provisional application. Has formalized and structured the growing issues and interest of both in addressing important non-economic issues. These agreements have a framework with list more than 40 areas of cooperation. And the reality is that this agreement is full of good intentions, but somewhat lacking in legal content and specific actions. Although both partners share common values as democracy or the rule of law, it is only now when cooperation, alliance between nation and multilateralism seems to be more in question than ever, that the two powers can reaffirm themselves and create a true alliance. So my paper aims to assess the trajectory of these relations over the past 2 decades, and examining how the experience between the two partners have led to signing these 2 agreements. And I would like to show how the dialogue between the two has been changing, as well as the legal normative basis. And in summary, how the European Union and Japan have embarked on a new path of partnership, mutual cooperation, both commercially and strategically in the 2020s. And the truth is that Japan and the European Union have been working on a deeper level of cooperation that not only seeks to reinforce mutual relations, bilateral relations, but also aims to promote shared norms and standards globally. Both have seen themselves as leading examples of normative power. In other words, in times of turbulence in the world order, both seek to contribute to the consolidation of their bilateral relations, but also a kind of workers for the stability of the multilateral orders. And European Union-Japan's relation has not always been so successful. For decades, they have been characterized by trade tensions, more like economic competitors than partners. So there was no framework for cooperation. The real turning point came in 1991 with the Hague Declaration, and then in 2001 with the Action Plan. But both, for most authors, as well as for me, are merely declarations of good intention more than a real legal text. So they are small steps, but necessary steps. And in 2019, we have this agreement on connectivity. So we can say that the cooperation continue. And the desire of Japan and the European Union seems clear, to promote their bilateral relations, and at the same time to shape common rulemaking and global governance. However, there are regions, there are countries that do not have the same objectives. We have like a crucial moment for the liberal international order. We have conflicts between China and the USA. We have also regional instabilities for Japan, Korea, for European Union, Brexit. We have the pandemic, most probably post-COVID-19 economic recession, and probably social and political challenge in this way. And in this context, these arrangements have to prove that the partnership between the European Union and Japan can live up to the expectation, especially in times of crisis. And the implementation of the agreements will be the next text of whether Japan and the European Union remain distant geographically friends or are in an effective partnership with mutual benefits bilaterally, multilaterally, and globally. And only when mutual trust in the Japan-European Union bilateral partnership grows with the partnership be strong and have a positive impact on the international multilateral order. The next decade of implementation of this agreement will be essential for the legitimacy of the partnership's leadership in the multilateral order. And Japan-European Union collaboration in the 2 decades of 2000 has been really characterized by its untapped potential. However, the speed of this agreement they have been developed in a small time is really impressive, and it's really an opportunity for the partnership to become an example of new positive forms of connectivity around the world. Finally, in the current unprecedented context, the COVID-19, Japan and the European Union find themselves taking the same side in the debate, suggesting that they do have the potential to be true strategic partners, as they usually refer to themselves. And to conclude, in any case, there are like a natural connection between European Union and Japan, because the two actors have very similar positions on many global issues, climate change, trade, data protections. The truth that they are very connected in the ideas and in the values. However, the changing international scene makes increasingly important for actors such as Europe and Japan to articulate strategic visions and objectives in global governance. At the same time, it's important to remember that Japan and the European Union are kind of dependent on each other if they want to maintain some kind of influence in global governance. And this crisis will mean a choice between isolation or global solidarity to address large scale problems. Yes, I'm finishing. That transcend frontiers. And Japan and the European Union should be an example of union and solidarity in this moment. And thank you very much. Arigatou gozaimasu.
Thank you, Paula, very much. And I'm sure that Professor Imamura, who is with us today here, he found probably very interesting your presentation. So thank you very much. We will wait for reactions though to the very end of the whole session. I repeat, for those of you who have joined a little bit later, The speakers will be presenting their papers, and at the end of the session, we are going to reserve around 30 minutes for questions and reactions from the audience. So without further ado, I will move to the next speaker, who is Antonio José Pagan Sanchez. He comes from, he's actually a PhD candidate at the City University of Hong Kong and Nankai University. Today, he's going to be speaking about the rise of China and the US-Europe alliance drift in the 2010s, a lost decade for the European Union. So Antonio, the floor is yours.
Okay, so thank you, David, for the presentation. It's a great honor to take part in this conference today. And this is the topic of my conference, which is the rise of China and the US-Europe alliance drift in the 2010s, a lost decade for the European Union. But this approach is slightly different than the one that I have in my PhD. Because in my PhD, I don't focus on the European Union as the case of analysis. I focus on 5 Western European countries at the state level, because this is the puzzle. We are supposed to be in a power transition between the US and China, right? We have a rising power, which is China, and we have a declining power, which is the United States. And in this moment, the United States has a critical advantage when it comes to this balance of power between the US and China, and it's the system of alliances. The US is way ahead China when it comes to alliances. But what we see here is that the United States cannot always use its system of alliances when it comes to facing the rise of China, because those allies of the United States sometimes engage with China even against the opposition of the United States. So that's the issue that I want to analyze. And I focus on my PhD in 5 countries, which are Germany, the United Kingdom, France, Italy, and Spain. These 5 countries are the 5 largest economies in Europe between the US allies, and they also have the largest military spending in NATO, if we exclude the United States and Turkey. And in my PhD, I analyzed the behavior of these 5 countries in these 4 cases of analysis, which I think are the 4 most crucial ones when it comes to the balance of power between the US and China. And they are the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, the Belt and Road Initiative, the adoption of Huawei's 5G technology, and the consideration of China as a security threat within NATO's framework. But when I talk about my PhD dissertation with other people and I let them know about my approach, they often ask me this question: why don't you take the European Union as a whole as your case of analysis? Because in principle, of course, this would be a much better approach, right? Because we could have not just the position of 5 countries, we could have a very big political and economic community that has 27 or 28 members, depending on the moment that we are going to analyze, right? But my answer is that I don't take the European Union as the case of analysis because when it comes to analyzing Europe-China relations, it is still very important to have a state-level approach. So it means that even though the European Union is a very important actor, the individual preferences and behavior of states at the state level are still the crucial aspects of Europe-China relations. And I say that because in these 4 cases of analysis, the European Commission has been unable to forge a common response to deal with China. And in some cases, it has tried to do it, but it has failed. But there are other cases in which it hasn't even tried to have that common response. So, as I said, the state-level approach is still important to analyze Europe-China relations, and we are going to see it in these 4 cases of analysis. This is the first one, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. Those 5 countries of analysis of my PhD are in red because they had a different position than the United States. And unfortunately, but for the United States, in this case, these 5 countries of analysis decided to join the bank, even against the admonition of their American ally. And what is more, it was the United Kingdom, the closest American ally in the region, the first European country that made public its willingness to join the bank. And which was the role of the European Union in this? Well, the role was not very important because the European Commission did not even try to develop a common response to deal with this bank. It just limited its role to complain about the unilateral decision of the United Kingdom to join this bank without letting it know, without consulting this issue with other European partners and allies. And then later we have the case of the Belt and Road Initiative, which is even more interesting because in this case we see that the European Commission wants to forge a common response to this initiative, because even though the European Commission recognized that this initiative was important and had many opportunities when it comes to economic cooperation between Europe and China, it also it also posed some challenges to European unity. So it tried to forge a common response, but it failed because, well, we don't see this in this map, but most countries in the Eastern and Central European region, they decided to join this initiative. And actually, I have a paper published on this issue, and my theory is that uh, having a so-called populist government in some of those countries was one of the main reasons why there were many countries willing to join this bank. I mean, having a populist government was a sufficient reason to join it because those countries had bad relations with the European Commission. So with that decision of joining the initiative, they wanted to show that they were sovereign countries. And in this case, Italy, which is the only country that has a different position than the United States, decided to join this bank and to have a common response than the one of the official position of the European Commission. It did that once it had a new government between the North League and the Five Stars movement. So in this case, we see that the European Commission tried to forge a common response, but it eventually failed. Then we have the case of the adoption of Huawei's 5G technology, in which for the first time we see European unity to deal with a Chinese initiative. And is this document of cybersecurity of 5G networks, which was a kind of toolbox, a kind of guidelines which recognized the security aspects of the deployment of 5G networks. But still, it is the decision at the state level of each country, of each member state of the European Union, the issue or the aspect that is more important here. Because as we can see, there is no unified response on this issue. And even though the United Kingdom, well, I know that the United Kingdom is no longer a member of the European Union, but 3 years ago it still was. And the United Kingdom and France, they have the same position than the United States, but we can see that Spain, Italy, and Germany haven't supported, or at least haven't done it yet. They haven't supported the position of the United States that consists in like banning the deployment of Huawei's 5G technology over the medium or over the long term. And finally, we have the case of the consideration of China as a military threat within NATO's framework. We have many opportunities of cooperation between the between the European Union and NATO. we have a common understanding on many issues, for example, on Russia, China, and counter-terrorism and nuclear proliferation. But still, 2 years ago, Donald Trump tried to declare China as a military threat within NATO's framework. It was the individual decision of each one of those member states. The issue that is important here, because the European Commission didn't have a large role here. Each country decided whether or not support the United States, and some Eastern European countries supported the United States, but these 5 countries of analysis didn't do it. And this is just the conclusion. The European Union is a very important actor, but when we have to analyze Europe-China relations, it is still very important to have also a state-based approach. Otherwise, we will miss the whole picture. But is it really a lost decade for the European Union? I would say that not at all, because we can see that there are increasing attempts coming from the European Commission to deal with China with a common voice. And the European Commission declared China like 1 year ago as a cooperation partner, a negotiation partner, an economic competitor, and a systemic rival. And just last but not least, there are many European Union officials nowadays talking about the strategic autonomy of Europe. And I will say that Europe already had autonomy before. We have seen that during the last decade when it comes to dealing with China. Those European countries didn't always have the same position than the United States. But is it strategic? I will say no. Because if we want to take this concept of Robert Cohen, which is effective multilateralism, those countries are autonomous, but they don't have the same response to when dealing with China. So they cannot benefit from a coordinated response to dealing with China that would increase their benefits and reinforce their position when dealing with third countries on third issues. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Antonio, very much. It was very interesting, and even more knowing that you are based in the region, or now with the COVID, we don't know anymore. But I mean, at least you are based at the university in the region, so that's very interesting. We'll move to the next speaker, who is a speaker that is much closer than the previous speaker. So Natalia, she's based here in Bilbao at the University of Deusto. She's a PhD candidate here. And today she's going to be presenting about 25 years of Asia-Europe meeting, ASEM, a long-lasting Asia-Pacific and European Union collaboration. Natalia, the floor is yours.
Okay. Thank you, David. Thank you. I've seen that my colleagues have brought PowerPoints with them. I don't have one, so hopefully I will be brief and not very boring. Okay. As said, I'm going to talk about the Asia-Europe meeting, which is a long-lasting Asia-Pacific and European Union collaboration, and specifically I'm going to make an overview on gender equality, which is my main area of research. So first of all, I'm going to say what the ASEM is and explain briefly its main pillars and its characteristics, and then talk about specific action that has been undertaken on gender equality matters. So first of all, the Asia-Europe meeting is an informal and intergovernmental process of dialogue between the member states, the European Commission, and also the Asean Secretariat. And there are many meetings and many sectorial meetings that are held in this forum, but the main event are the summits, which are held every 2 years in different cities all over Asia and also Europe. In those summits are transparent forums for discussing topical issues such as gender equality, amongst others, as we will see. The three main pillars of the SEM are the political one, the economic and financial one, and finally the social, cultural, and educational pillar. But all of them are laying on two principal characteristics, which are the informality of discussions in open fora, and also the fostering of an equal partnership between the members. This is important because all members here can speak their mind freely, as they're not legally binded by any statement or any agreement they will agree, so they will reach in these meetings. And as it's an equal partnership, they can all again speak freely. Related to the last pillar I've talked about, which is the social, cultural, and economical pillar, educational pillar, we can find the gender equality. But although gender equality is a transversal matter, which can be indeed in economical matters and also can be found in political decision-making processes, it has also been approached as a central matter in the SM. All members and all countries in the SM have to take into account a gender balanced decision-making approach in all topics and in all decisions they take, no matter what the topic is. Then specifically, in the last 5 years, the SM has held different events related directly with the gender equality. The first one was held in 2017, which was the first SM conference on women's economic empowerment, creating equal opportunities in the world of work. In this event, they highlighted that all efforts of all members of the SM shall be put in eliminating violence, within that all women will have full participation in the decision-making processes. And then later on 2020, the gender equality matter was approached in a more economic and sanitary way as the COVID-19 pandemic arrived. So the SEM high level had dialogue on women's economic empowerment amid the COVID-19 pandemic was held. And here the meeting policymakers and stakeholders exchanged views and experiences concerning gender equality, but always related with the COVID-19 pandemic. And this is because there are many international organizations that have stressed that minorities have been especially affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. And amongst these minorities, women and girls were very affected. So after this meeting in 2020, the members agreed to unify awareness for having coordinated policies for fostering this women empowerment and the COVID-19 pandemic. And then only 2 months later, in November, the EU Central Asia Ministerial Meeting, which is one of the sectorial meetings I've mentioned before, the partners agreed to act directly on gender equality through education, work, and opportunities for women in decision-making posts. So by all this, I want to say that at least in the last 5 years, the gender equality has been a main topic for the SM, which and lately in the last year, the goal to achieve gender equality has been hindered because of the pandemic. But the countries have to undertake what I wanted to say in conclusion is that most of the countries have to undertake a more aggressive approach to foster gender equality as of the arrival of the pandemic. And we're not in the best of these scenarios to undertake strong action, but as these last meetings demonstrate, that is a main worry for both Asia and Europe, and hopefully through the different meetings in the SM, we will reach in the next years a best gender equality.
Thank you, Natalia, for your presentation. Actually, you had like more than 3 minutes, so that was perfect. I'll move to the next speaker then, who is Carmen Martinez San Millán. She comes from a place that is very fond in my memories because I'm from that region originally, from Castilla y León. She comes actually from the Universidad de Valladolid. She's a PhD candidate there. And today she's going to be presenting about the Memorandum of Understanding within the Belt and Road Initiative, the European Common Commercial Policy at Crossroads. So Carmen, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, David. So glad to meet you again. First, I would like to thank the organizing committee of the University of Deusto and the Jean Monnet Network on European Union Asean Pacific dialogue to allow me to share some ideas on whether the European Union member states are violating or not the common commercial policy in this international conference. Some things have been pointed out by Antonio Bagan, so I will start. Since his election as a General Secretary of the Communist Party of China in November 2012, Xi Jinping has promoted the doctrine of the Chinese dream, understood as the rejuvenation of the Chinese nation and the impulse of a strong country, where citizens experience a considerable improvement in their quality of life. Nowadays, China is no longer an undeveloped country. To reach its current position, the Beijing government has had to make great efforts to modernize its policies and strategies and to change its perception abroad. Initiatives such as Made in China 2025 or the ban on the import of plastic waste in January 2018 are some examples of the great changes that China is undertaking. However, the most impressive plan today is the Belt and Road Initiative. Some of China's partners in this initiative are European Union member states, such as Italy, which must simultaneously comply with European Union law and with the agreements reached with China. These concurrent obligations are currently causing legal problems, and we must answer the question of whether member states are violating European Union law, and more specifically, the common commercial policy. As we will see, the violation of European Union law is arguable, but the weakening of the European Union trade power as a consequence of the bilateral memorandums of understanding between European Union member states and China raises no doubts and puts European Union at crossroads. So in this context, what should European Union do to stop the rise of Chinese influence in the continent? But first, what is the Belt and Road Initiative? Let me give some basic details about this plan. The Belt and Road Initiative, originally called One Belt, One Road, was launched by President Xi Jinping in 2013, and it can be defined as a Chinese plan to promote policy coordination, infrastructure connection, trade facilitation, financial integration, industrial cooperation, and mutual understanding among peoples. A plan to boost economic and political relations with neighboring countries. Through the economic diplomacy understood as the use of trade, investment, and finances to support strategic interests, China aims to achieve its external objectives in the medium and long term, consolidating its status as a global power. But we must bear in mind that this Belt and Road Initiative is not a multilateral project, but a bilateral one, as the extensive network of international relations between China and its partners is formalized through memorandums of understanding, not through multilateral international treaty. So in this way, China manages to modulate its interests based on the partner with whom it negotiates. Now I would like to pay attention to these memorandums of understanding signed between China and some European Union member states within the Belt and Road Initiative. As we all know, China is the second largest partner of the European Union, and the European Union is the main China's trade partner. Even though the formalization of these trade relations at the regional level has struggled for a long time, China is trying to step up efforts to build cultural soft power and to overcome the existing obstacles to share its vision of international cooperation and economic development in a region that has been historically dominated by the Western market neoliberal hegemonic ideology. A major recent advance has been the negotiation and adoption of the European Union-China Comprehensive Agreement on Investment, as analyzed yesterday by Fang Xiaotong. Nonetheless, the European Union lack of cohesion and the dilatory progress in regional relations has made China focus on expanding its bilateral relations on the European continent within the Belt and Road Initiative. China is aware of the reluctance of some European countries and the European Union itself to do business with it due to its economic structure and poor transparency. So it's focusing its efforts on finding allies with respect to which China can retain its negotiating power and win the balance. In this figure, we can see the contractual arrangements and other informal or formal arrangements concluded bilaterally between China and European countries until March 2020, evidencing the influence of China in the region. As we can see, to formalize Chinese investments in third countries, the Chinese government is currently negotiating and signing numerous memorandums of understanding with its partners, including some European Union member states. Hungary was the first European Union member state to sign a MoU with China, and on March 2019, Italy has been the first 7-group country to formally join the Belt and Road Initiative by signing a memorandum of understanding with China, which has caused significant tensions within the European Union. But what are these memorandums of understanding in legal basis? Memorandums of understanding are international agreements, but not international treaties as such, which implies that these documents may not lead to rights and obligations under international law, falling then within the scope of soft law, which is halfway between fully binding treaties and fully political positions. States sign memorandums of understanding instead of treaties to coordinate their behavior and to avoid the cause of violation. If China and European Union member states signed international treaties instead of MoUs, these international treaties would be governed by international law, including European law in force. As stated before, these MoUs signed between China and the European Union member states as cooperation agreements are not international treaties, and in principle, they are not governed by international law. However, we must bear in mind that when talking about the European Union, it is an international organization and its legal framework goes beyond simple cooperation between sovereign states. Within the European Union, member states cede the exercise of part of their sovereign powers, as for example, the external trade policy of their countries through international treaties, and at the same time, the European Union supervises the exercise of the sovereign powers that the states have not ceded to it in order to improve the cohesion of the different state and European policies. One of the sovereign powers that remains in the hands of the states is the conclusion of trade cooperation agreements with other countries other than free trade agreements. Regarding these cooperation agreements, the European Council adopted the Council decision of the 22nd of July 1974, and in this document, the Council established a consultation procedure for cooperation agreements between member states and third countries, and this decision states that member states shall inform the Commission and other member states of agreement relating to economic and industrial cooperation, and in particular those which may affect trade. The problem is that according to the European Commission, as included in a recent European Court of Auditors report, they had not been informed about any MoU signed by member states, thus violating the 1974 decision. Besides, taking into account that the European Union has concluded in principle the said comprehensive agreement on investment and is willing to negotiate a free trade agreement with China, bilateral MoUs between China and European Union member states also violate, or at least seem incompatible with Article 4 of the Treaty on the European Union, regarding their refrain from any measure which could jeopardize the attainment of the Union's objective. Sorry. Furthermore, and this is the most important thing, we can lead the latch of a deeper debate. If we closely take a look to the content of these MoUs, we will be able to perceive that every of them contains an article related to trade entitled Unimpeded Trade and Investment. Interpreting this paragraph broadly and focusing in the content rather than the format, one could argue that this text is masking a typical disposition from a free trade agreement that falls within the scope of the common commercial policy of the European Union, which is an exclusive competence of this international organization, meaning that free trade agreements must be concluded by the European Union itself and not by its member states bilaterally. To avoid this serious violation of the European Union law, member states such as Italy have made an effort to ensure that the format of the MOU clarifies its non-binding nature, using the form of a memorandum of understanding and terms like unimpeded trade and investment, thus not giving the European Union the chance to contest and declare illegal these kind of agreements. However, taking into account the content and not this format, not a de jure violation, but a de facto violation of the European Union law can be discussed, because although it's not a non-binding international norm, moving forward in implementing these intentions could not only exacerbate political tensions within the European Union, but also lead to a violation of Italy's legal obligation as a European Union member state. As a last resort, the European Commission considers that a member state has failed to fulfill an obligation under the treaties, it shall launch an infringement procedure. The problem is that this procedure is the arbitrariness that surrounds it, since it's the European Commission who decides what kind of violation and against which member state it will initiate proceedings, as well as on the timing of these proceedings. Well, leaving behind the discussion whether these modes represent a violation of the European Union common commercial policy or not, what rises no doubt is the fact that these agreements entail a weakening of the European Union trade and investment power. Traditionally, all trade and investment relations with our countries have been formalized through multilateral free trade agreements concluded by the European Union within the common commercial policy and governed by international and European law. The growing number of bilateral agreements for cooperation, here called memorandums of understanding, between European Union member states and other international powers, such as China, in areas related to trade and investment, not only implies the weakening of the European integration in these matters, but an increase in China's influence in this region, putting European Union at crossroads. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Carmen, very much for your presentation. We'll move to the next speaker, and actually we might have more time for debate, which is, I think, is great, because that helps to have more interaction. So without further ado, the next speaker is Juan Luis López Aranguren. He also comes from the University of Zaragoza. He's an assistant professor there at the Japan Research Group. Today, he's going to be presenting the paper entitled "The Geostrategic Projection of the European Union in the Asia-Pacific." So Juan Luis, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation. I'm going to share the screen. So, is it visible, right? Okay.
Yes, perfectly.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'm going to talk about the geostrategic projection of the European Union in the Asia-Pacific. And I have divided this presentation in 4 different parts. The first one is the evolution of the concept from Asia-Pacific to Indo-Pacific, and how the West has modified this definition, making it or transforming it from a geographical concept to a geopolitical concept. The second part, I would like to talk about why this region is so important for Europe's security and international trade. The third part will be talking about the 3 European countries that insofar they have developed and their own national geostrategic documents that are insofar France, Germany, and Netherlands. And lastly, I would like to talk about the EU's new position with respect to Indo-Pacific that has been recently published in the last days. So first of all, I would like to talk about this evolution of the concept. Originally, it was used a purely Asian concept, that it was a geographical purely concept. It's a continental idea, and it has some kind of colonial political background, as Edward said, coined in his book Orientalist. No? This will project the idea that the European metropolis can modify the political status quo of Asia. There is no room for multilateralism, and it's very China-centered because of its geostrategic importance in terms of demographic, in terms of economy, and in terms of politics. Then we see the evolution of this concept to a more open, a more broad concept that is the Asia-Pacific. Here, this is an economic concept. It involves continental and maritime nuances. It's considered a post-colonial concept, and it's open to multilateralism. So because we can see this important international organization that is the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Forum, the APEC. But in general, India is not including this concept. As we can see, these are very broad concepts, very generic concepts, but they can coin more or less the evolution of this transformation of the axis center of the world. And lastly, we reach the last part of this evolution, that is the Indo-Pacific. This is a both economic and security concept. It's purely a maritime term that allows the projection of power from the west, from the naval powers towards the sea, towards the land, sorry. This is the consolidation of this region as an important global axis because of the demographic and economic reasons that we will see in the next slide. And it also involves the opposite dimension of influence from Asia to West, because demographic and economy, because as we will see, more than 60% of world gross domestic product is produced in this region, and also it includes more than 60% of world's population. And here we can see also another important international organization that is the Quad Group, the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue Group. So it's not only an economic concept, it's also a security concept, and also includes India. Why is India so important? Because it will be the most populated country in the world, overpassing China in a few years, and it's also the most populated democracy in the planet. So because of many geostrategic reasons, it's a very important global player. So we can see here the three scholarly figures that will symbolize the milestone of this evolution of the concept. In the 19th century, we have the figure of Alfred Thayer Mahan, who coined this famous phrase that says, "Whoever dominates the Indian Ocean will dominate Asia, and the fate of the world will be decided in its waters." So we may see here that he's considered the Indian Ocean as very important geostrategical area for projecting the military power to the rest of the world. In the 20th century, we have the figure of Karl Haushofer, who tried to coin a kind of intellectual justification for Germany imperialism. And his main thesis is that we are witnessing the dawn of the Pacific Age. He considered this the Asiatic monsoon countries because of demographic reasons. Germany must promote geopolitical unity of this region in order to kick out United States and British maritime power, these two important whales. And he coined, or he had this vision where Germany must align itself with India, China, and Japan, leading this kind of Eurasiatic bloc. Of course, none of this happens. Japan invaded China, the Second World War erupted, so nothing of this happens, but at least we have here the intellectual contribution in this order. And lastly, we have in the 21st century, Henry Kissinger, who in its lecture in January 2009, he coined this phrase. He said that one of the most drastic global changes that will take place in this century will be the shift of the center of gravity of international relations from the Atlantic to the Indian Ocean and Pacific, right? So we are seeing now this kind of transition in terms of geopolitical axis of the world from the West, from a maritime perspective, to the East in terms of the Indo-Pacific Ocean, right? Now I would like to talk about why this region is so important for Europe. And I have focused in three different aspects: economy, security, and multilateralism. In economy, the basic data here shows that Indo-Pacific comprises 62% of world gross domestic product and 65% of world population, about 5 billion people. So this is why it's so important. Also, between 8 and 12% of all British, French, and German trade passes through the South China Sea. So this is a very important shipping route, something that we have seen in the last weeks with the blockade of the Suez Canal, with that evergreen ship who was blocking all this travel route, shipping route, and that hampered the global economy, especially affecting the US economy, right? Here in security, we may see also this manifestation of the allocation of military forces of the United States. So we may see that before the end of the Cold War, the most important US deployment of personnel in terms of soldiers, in terms of personnel, etc., was the European Command, right? In order to counterbalance the military projection of the USSR. But in the last years, in 2019, the most important US military deployment was in the Pacific, Indo-Pacific area, in the Pacific Command, with about 95,000 soldiers and military other personnel deployed there, right? Overpassing the European and the Central Command that involves the Middle East, right? So we may see here that also the United States, as one of the most important military powers in the world, is addressing and acknowledging the military importance of Indo-Pacific as a hotspot for the future geostrategic projection of the different players in the world. This can be seen also in the Quad group, the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, that is this military alliance between United States, Australia, India, and Japan, right? Also with this, we may see the importance of the GSOMIA, that is this agreement, military agreement for sharing military intelligence between Japan and South Korea, right? So this is also called the Diamond Group because it symbolizes like a kind of diamond, no? If we trace the lines there. And lastly, we may see that it's important for the European Union because of the multilateral dimension. And here we have the project of the Free and Open Indo-Pacific strategy coined by Japan and adopted with more or less modification by the rest of the Quad players, Australia, India, and United States, right? So for several reasons, Indo-Pacific is very important and is vital for future political projection of the European Union. Now, I would like to talk about the three countries that insofar have developed strategic plans for Indo-Pacific. That these are Germany, France, and Netherlands, and the late arrival of EU's unified strategy for the Indo-Pacific. All these three countries, they have focused in three different important dimensions that are security, multilateralism, and development. But each country had put the focus in one different aspect in comparison with the others. No? Also, these three countries, they are all colonial powers who had very important presence, political and economic presence in the Indo-Pacific, and some of them, they are still players, they are still members of the Indo-Pacific groups. For example, France, and we are going to focus this country right now, is by full right an Indo-Pacific country because of its overseas departments in the Indian Ocean and in the Pacific Ocean, no? For example, Mururoa, Martin, etc. No? So France, chronologically, was the first European country to publish an Indo-Pacific strategy. It was published in May 2009, which was an update from a 2018 version. It put a strong focus in security. In fact, the organ who published this document was the Ministry of Defense. No? So this is also a symbol of which aspect will be highlighted in comparison with the other. But this security may be seen in a broad dimension, in a broad consideration, because it includes human security. For example, threats from criminal organization against pirates, tackling climate change, natural disaster, etc. No? So it's security in an extended way, not only against other military powers. Here we can see why France is by full right an Indo-Pacific nation. It has its main islands, Mayotte and Reunion, but there are many others that extends along all this huge region of the planet. In total, there are about 1.5 million French citizens living in this area, and also 93% of France's exclusive economic zone is comprising this territory. Here we can see the three theaters of operation that are most important for France. One is the east area of Africa that also allows the access to the Red Sea, that it will be vital for the trade routes to the European Union. The other will be the south of the Indian Ocean, and the last one will be the Pacific Ocean, also with Mururoa and other islands, with where also France was conducting nuclear military tests in the last decades. Here we can see the allocation of forces, and one of the most important allocation of forces is in the south of the Indian Ocean with about 2,000 personnel, and also in Djibouti with 1,450 personnel deployed there. Also, Djibouti is very important because it's where China has opened its first military overseas base there, and it also allows the projection of power to the Red Sea, that is also the entrance point to the Suez Canal, right? With a very important shipping route, as we have seen with the Evergreen ship who was blocking all this trade route in the last weeks. Here I would like to focus in the role of Germany. So Germany was the second European country in developing an Indo-Pacific strategy. This was published in September 2020, quite recently. And in comparison with France, Germany put a lot of focus in multilateralism and development instead of just security. So Germany wanted to address the issues of developing infrastructures, education, and environmental issues, but in collaboration with other counterparts. Which are these counterparts? As they explain in these policy guidelines for the Indo-Pacific, are the countries that share a common geopolitical view of the world. Which is this? This is the countries that share democracy in terms of the political dimension and economy, free market economy in terms of the economic dimension. Right? So this will be the two pivotal points in order to allow Germany to develop this multilateral projection. And lastly, we reach Netherlands, that is the last European country joining this group of countries developing Indo-Pacific strategy. It was shortly after Germany. This was published in 2020. And the document of Netherlands focused in economy and trade instead of security and instead of multilateralism. It's the less extended also, and is less assertive in this other dimension of security, multilateralism, and political positioning. So the main focus, the main importance of this paper is economy and trade. Why? Because of economic reasons. Also, in 2019, Netherlands was the largest importer of goods of the 10 Asean countries, totaling 30 billion euros, and also more than 22% of total Dutch imports comes from countries in Asia. So we can see here how these different countries, they highlight the dimension that affects them the most. Depends if they have territory in the Indo-Pacific as France, if they prefer to collaborate in terms of multilateralism as Germany, or to focus in economy as Netherlands. So we may reach here why the EU.
I have to warn you that your time has expired, so if you can just finish in 1 minute.
Okay. Here I'm just talking about why the US has arrived so late. So some scholars say that this is because of the role of China and Belt and Road Initiative among the countries that are strongly in depth there. So recently, in April 16, so just the last week, the EU Council adopts conclusion on EU strategy for Indo-Pacific cooperation. So lastly, we are seeing the emergence of a pan-European strategy for the Indo-Pacific adopted by the European Union, not only by the state members there. They put a strong focus in regional stability, security, prosperity, and sustainable development. And here we can see the fact sheet where they address and they do a brief research and a brief indication about the main areas where they want to work. So this is ocean governance, research and technology, connectivity, health, strengthen regional organization, intensify cooperation in a multilateral forum, and reinforcing tackling global challenges such as climate change. So we still will need some years to see how this European project evolves, and also if there will be new countries developing their own national strategy, but at least this forum, this diplomatic battlefield is going to receive a lot of attention in the next year. So, well, thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to this conference. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Juan Luis, for your presentation. And without further ado, last but not least, Professor Park, who is based in the Korea Polytechnic University. Today, his presentation will be focusing on the roles and strategies of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations in the Belt and Road Initiative. So, Professor, the floor is yours. Professor Park, I don't know if you can hear me.
I think his camera and microphone are off.
Yep.
Professor Park, can you hear us?
Yeah. Do
Yes.
you see me?
Yes.
Okay.
Perfectly now, yes.
Do you see my presentation file as well?
No. No,
No?
I think your camera and microphone are off. No.
Hello?
Now, yeah.
All right. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right.
We can hear
So
you
then,
and see you.
yeah, I start. So it was very interesting presentations from the young scholars. So I will not overlap the contents what has been already presented. So my presentation title is The Roles and Strategies of ASEAN in the BRI. So as a previous presenter explained, the BRI is the most important project from Chinese side, particularly initiated by the President Xi in 2013 when he became the power. So the BRI tried to connect and cooperate with 6 main economic corridors, not only from Asian continent, but also Europe. So this project intends to build the strong infrastructure, particularly in power transport, telecommunication, and water and sanitation. And total amount of investment could be account over $1 trillion over 10 years period. But recently, Chinese government estimated it would cost more or less between $4 to $8 trillion. It means much higher cost than they calculated in the early 2010s. And the National Development and Reform Commission is a supervisor and maintained with other major ministries. So BRI is a pure geopolitical goal and economic strategy in Asian region and beyond. And in this case, ASEAN plays very important role for a Chinese BRI as well as vice versa, because it connects China to Southeast Asia and even the Europe. So ASEAN places like the bridge between Asia and Europe. So BRI is seen as a great opportunity to develop infrastructure for ASEAN side. I like to skip the theoretical debate. Then what are strategies of ASEAN and China in BRI? ASEAN's strategies are mostly pretty much urgent to improve infrastructure that would cost up to $3.1 trillion next 10 years, calculated by Asian Development Bank. And furthermore, the ASEAN focuses on the increasing trade volume through the China toward the global market, estimated from $4 trillion to $5 trillion in the next 20 years. And basically, the ASEAN tries to connect China's supply chain to a global market. And the rising trade and FDI, particularly in ASEAN next decade. So 2 main pillars. First, outsourcing to China from Singapore, Malaysia, and Thailand, particularly in the mid and high-tech side. And Chinese outsourcing from Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, Vietnam, so-called developing countries, importing mainly raw materials and cheap labor force used the low value-added products. So these accelerated trade and investment flows pretty strongly since 2013. So it's a clear difference between until the 2013 and after the 2014. Until the 2013, China focused mainly on raw materials, while since 2014, high value-added products. So this table shows the Chinese, the trade with ASEAN, with China increased last 15 years. And this graphic also shows FDI from the Chinese side toward ASEAN increased pretty strongly. This table shows mostly Chinese investment and Korean investment increased last 15 years pretty strongly, certainly trade volume as well. So what is the reality of BRI in ASEAN? So there are over 1,100 projects in 88 countries since 2030, worth more than 750 billion US dollars. But 4 ASEAN countries belong to among top 10 host countries. And these projects are focused mainly on the infrastructure in East and South Asia. And the largest top 10 projects in ASEAN are from Malaysia and Thailand strongly, and among other ASEAN member nations. I show you the graphics as this graphic shows. Among top 10 major investment receivers, the 4 ASEAN member nations belong to that. And which sector they receive and invest mostly, as I said, basic infrastructure, such as energy and electric power, transportation, and chemical engineering, and so on. And this graphic shows the reason where BRI investments are flowing, mainly East Asia and Pacific, and Europe and Central Asia. But Europe means not in Western Europe, but mostly Central and Eastern European countries. So this table shows the top 10 the largest projects of BRI in ASEAN countries. So what are goals for ASEAN strategies? Number 1 is to overcome inadequate infrastructure. Second, to reduce the trade imbalance with China. Third, to increase exports to China and Europe. So that's the ASEAN side. And from the Chinese side, action plan of BRI is to target reducing air pollution and overproduction inside of Chinese market. So they have different perspectives why they try to drive the BRI projects. So the volume of BRI looks like so. And this is a comprehensive, the route of BRI, composed of 6 land lines with 2 sea lines. And Chinese investment flows to BRI participating economies mostly, and the other part is Sub-Saharan Africa, Latin America, and so on. And the lowest capital inflow is Europe, excluding the Western European countries, except Greece and Italy. So then the real problem is the financing and high risk of BRI. We used to call it the debt trap strategies. Many of you have already heard about what happened in Sri Lanka and Tanzania in African countries and so on. Similar things are happening even in ASEAN countries. For instance, the high challenge to attract investment and high ratio of debt in their GDP, particularly in the low-income countries among ASEAN member nations. I show you the graphics. Number 1 is the BRI investment is mainly based on the public side investment. So BRI has very high difficulties to pull the capital from the private sector. What does it mean? It means the profit making possibility is pretty low. Therefore, the private sectors are hesitating to be involved or to participate in these projects. And as this graphic shows, the countries participating in the BRI project for investment is pretty much limited, except Saudi Arabia. But Saudi Arabia has capability to invest in their infrastructures, and certainly Hong Kong and Macau as well is a part of Chinese territory and Chinese inland capital, and Australia, something like that. But other countries are pretty low participation ratio in terms of capital investment. So if you look at the Chinese statistics, so far around $159 billion have been invested from the Chinese public sector, mainly Chinese public bank. But the problem is rising concerns of debt sustainability, whether or not, particularly the low-income countries, regardless of ASEAN member nation or other part of the world, can maintain their high debt ratio. So due to the high cost, the poor information about investment, financing terms, and lack of a comprehensive fiscal framework are all sources from the problems in the local countries receiving Chinese capital investment. That is rather pretty much serious problems. So the core point of analysis on BRI in ASEAN and China, I'd like to explain it more detail by using the statistical data. Simply, the core point is among the ASEAN countries, particularly Malaysia, Cambodia, and Laos, do have too high debt ratio in terms of their GDP capacity. Malaysia is pretty decent with 20%, but 20% is pretty high if you look at the debt ratio of GDP. But in Cambodia, nearly 40%, and Laos, People's Democratic Republic, over 110%, which cannot be sustainable to pay back their debt to China. So this table also shows the trade balance with ASEAN among the trade partners, and as this table shows, the trade with China made the greatest the trade deficit among ASEAN member nations, and Korea is the second largest trade deficit countries. With European Union, ASEAN still makes trade surplus, but unfortunately, this high trade surplus made equalized with the trade deficit with China. And this graphic shows you the export to BRI participating economies increased continuously since 2000 to 2017. It means China's strategy to increase and to focus on participating economies to be interdependent by time. While the OECD member nations, the trade volume have declined continuously since year 2000. And this graphic shows, as explained, several ASEAN member nations. I'm finishing soon. Several member nations in ASEAN, particularly low-income countries, do have a too high the debt ratio in their GDP. So my conclusion remark is the rapidly growing Chinese economy is a sort of the development model for ASEAN countries, but the China focused on and aim at the multiple targets, particularly markets, energy resources, and technologies. So that makes the trade-off for ASEAN countries, particularly low-income countries, and that result in a high ratio of debt, so-called the low-income ASEAN countries have been in debt, the trap strategies. So interaction between ASEAN and China to build a global supply chain, but China makes much more profit than ASEAN member nations makes. So this is a part of a region building for developing infrastructures. But if you look at the inside, it is not an equalized the win-win approach, but a win-lose approach. As said, favoring China rather than in ASEAN so far. Thank you very much. I'm finished.
Thank you very much, Professor Park, for your intervention. And I would like actually to thank all the speakers today for keeping so strictly on the time. I know that my task is not yeah, cool. I think someone has the mic open, so if everybody could turn the microphones off. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. Sorry, I was just saying that I truly appreciate all the speakers sticking as much as possible to the time. This is extremely important when we are in a virtual environment. And in this way also, I think we are going to have time for actually a little bit more than 30 minutes for the most interactive part, that is collecting questions from the audience. So as we did yesterday, we have a reaction button at the very bottom of your screens. You can raise your hands up and I will be collecting the questions. I also know that we have some students here. I will be asking you directly to turn your microphone on and to put your camera on to directly ask your questions. So I'll be presenting you first of all. And just one very brief thing before we start with the questions. I will ask the speakers to please be brief. So in that way we can collect more questions and we can make the discussion as much interactive as possible. So without further ado, I will ask firstly to Markel Cura, who I think he has a question, to please turn your microphone on and camera on so you can ask.
Yes, thank you, David. Well, first of all, I want to thank the organizers of the event for having some time to debate. And well, I would like to ask my question to Antonio Jose about his topic. Well, shall I ask it? Well, the International Monetary Fund has projected that China's GDP is expected to grow by 8.4% this year. So, well, little by little, China is emerging as the new superpower that will overtake the United States to become the most important nation in the world. Even in the Asia-Pacific region, the USA has recently lost its military supremacy to China. So how do you think the European Union will react to this event? I mean, what position will it take? Thank you.
Well, thank you for your question. I think first of all, we shouldn't take the rise of China as, for granted, because it is often assumed that China's economic growth will last forever. And when we make this kind of forecast, it's always assumed that as long as China will continue rising or in the future, it will eventually surpass the United States. I think it's not that clear. I am not saying that it won't happen. I am just saying that China has some internal problems. For example, its demographic problem because of the one-child policy during more than 30 years. And it also has some problems of sustainability in its own internal economic model. Having said that, in the case that China surpasses the United States and becomes the world leading power, I think that the European Union will eventually side with the United States, because they are like, after all, they are like-minded allies, they are partners, and they have a common understanding on many issues. It doesn't mean that this understanding will be easy, and we haven't already seen during Trump presidency that the relationship between the United States and Europe can have very bad moments. But still, I think if we look at the trend during the last decade, we see that security factors are increasingly important when it comes to European engagement with China. For example, with the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, some people in Washington thought that this bank was a kind of challenge to Bretton Woods institutions and that would undermine the liberal international order. But still, Europe took part in that bank. But then we can see that in the Belt and Road Initiative and in the case of the adoption of Huawei's 5G technology, those security concerns were increasingly important. And we have also seen that during the last month, the relationship between the European Union and China has also have a very bad moment. They have implemented mutual sanctions and so on. So I think that even if the rise of China is successful, it won't necessarily mean that the European Union or the European region in general will have to side with China. I hope this answers your question.
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
I think we have also a question coming from Xavier Eguia. Before I introduce you, so please I remind the speakers and the attendees that you have a reaction button at the very bottom of your screen. You can raise your hand at any time and I can give you also the floor. So Xavier, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, David. Hello, good morning. I'm Xavier Eguia, a second-year student of law degree at Deusto University. And first of all, thank all the speakers for such interesting presentation. And my question is directed to Juan Luis López Aranguren, related to his presentation about the strategic projection of the European Union in the Asia-Pacific. And Xi Jinping has reportedly taken a hard line on security issues as well as foreign affairs, projecting a more nationalistic and assertive China on the world stage. Do you see a change of course in Chinese policies with regard to Europe possible after the impacts of COVID-19? And how does the trade war triggered by vaccines affect relations between Asia and the European Union? Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much for your question, Xavier. Well, we don't have enough time to see like the long-term consequences of the impact of COVID in terms of security and in terms of multilateralist issues, but at least for the past year, we can see some consequences. No? Some of these consequences have been like the chain disruption, the disruption of the chain supply from China and other exporter countries to other importer economies like the United States or the US or even Japan. No? So which effect has this provoked? One of the potential consequences is that most of them, they have addressed their attention to national producers. So this may have opened like a windows of opportunity in order to cut like the determination or the debt that these countries may have with China and other main supplies in the world, enhancing their national economies and therefore allowing for a more assertive position in terms of security, multilateralism, international organization, etc. No? One of these examples may be, for example, like the ban that India imposed into exportation of some medical supplies in the early stages of the pandemic in March of last year, because they need all these medical supplies for their 1.4 billion population, right? So this may be one example. In terms of the Chinese exportation, it may be seen also about, for example, the exportation of rare minerals that are needed for the production of electric conductors and superconductors, etc., in electronic industries. So all of these countries, they have decided to shift their attention to national producers or to alternative suppliers, even if that implies a higher cost. So some statistics says that this may be a correlation. It doesn't mean causation, but at least a correlation between this disruption in the supply chains and the fact that these other national countries like France, Germany, Netherlands, they have decided to project a more assertive position in enhancing Indo-Pacific and therefore challenging like the hegemonic role of China in so many different aspects of this geopolitical battlefield. No? But at least we need a few more months to see the long-term consequences of the COVID-19 impact in the geopolitics in the world. Thank you very much.
Okay, I think we also have a question from Patsy. So Patsy, the floor is yours.
Yes, hello, my name is Patsy, a student at the University of Deusto, and I'm studying a double degree in law and labor relations. For me, it's a pleasure to listen to you, so thank you for presenting these 9 themes. Well, my question is for Rosa Maria Ricoy, and it's about the cryptocurrencies. Combines, the platform for buying and selling cryptocurrencies rises strongly on its first day of trading. Its market value came to exceed $100 billion. Cryptocurrencies are becoming more and more valuable and are gradually entering the monopoly of physical money. As a young person, I'm interested and concerned about this issue, and I would like to know if they could replace physical money completely. Are these cryptocurrencies the future? Will they achieve solid agreements between the European Union and Asia? Thank you.
At the moment, the trading volumes are not large enough to destabilize a currency such as the European one, but this could change in the future. Is not Bitcoin is a type of cryptocurrency, but they are more than 2,000 different cryptocurrencies. Is not regulated by any entity, for example, a government or a central bank, don't have a real level store of value, potentially useful for illicit activities, tax evasion, for example, and is by demand, is a speculative asset. And all of this shows the rise of digital currencies and force us to reconsider their role in the future. But it's increasingly, a lot of people are using this type of cryptocurrency, but in my opinion, the future is not the cryptocurrency, but just, for example, digital euro or a cryptocurrency by China. Because it's necessary control possible risks about monetary or economy and financial system, because is the adoption of digital currencies by foreign central banks, for example, China, could make the European Union more sensitive to shocks from abroad. And opacity, unilateral commercial conditions, and abusive clauses justify the proliferation of public actions. And in this way, I think to respond and other cryptocurrencies, is necessary that all countries in the European Union to create a new or a virtual currency, for example, digital euro. Is my opinion, but there are a problem, in my opinion. This competition, for example, European Union, the USA, between China, all countries are at the moment to reconsider their position and their strict caution. And this is a problem, in my opinion, because it must be carefully designed so as not to affect monetary and financial stability, I think.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Guys, I think we have a question from you.
Hello, my name is Gaiska and I study law at the University of Deusto. And I would like to ask the following question to Juan Luis López Aranguren, also in relation to the geostrategic projection of the European Union in the Asia Pacific. So I've been reading that in 2012, the Pacific Alliance Agreement was signed, and the reasons for the creation of this has at least like two perspectives. The first one is the geopolitical perspective, and the second one is the economic perspective. So taking this into account, which are the objectives of these two perspectives?
Well, thank you very much for your question. Well, all these Pacific Alliance as regional networks, they may have like a limit potential among like some other regions, but idiosyncrasy or the particular characteristic of this free and open Indo-Pacific is that it involves many more players, global and regional players. It also involves like several nuclear powers, including France as an Indo-Pacific country by full right. It also includes members of the Security Council of United Nations, and it involves also geostrategic, a very important geostrategic counterbalance to the projection of China. No, so like the difference between this free and open Indo-Pacific strategy and others like the Pacific Alliance or other kind of structures, regional structures, it may be like the scope, how much is the potential to affect the global dynamics and the global phenomena in this case. This doesn't mean that the free and open Indo-Pacific strategy will be like the last destination or the last stage. It may evolve and transform in other several kinds of maybe groups of countries that share more close geopolitical dimensions, characteristics. So maybe see, like in the same way that it was suggested that the European Union could transform itself in several speeds of sub-levels of governance, we may see that maybe the FOIP will transform itself in several levels of articulation, making a kind of composed organization, or not organization, this is maybe composed alliance between groups of countries. In one side, we have the close connection between Japan and United States in terms of security, especially with the proposal for reform the Article 9 of the Japanese Constitution that impedes to have like to declare the war and to have an army. And in other sense, we may see also the cooperation between Japan and India, because both of them, they offer several advantages. Japan with a relatively small population and a very mature economy, and in the other side, India with a huge population, but an economy that is still under development. So both of them, they can complement each other. No? So this is what happened when they have like this big alliance between very different countries in comparison with maybe regional alliance or partnerships with more similar countries in terms of demographic, economy, etc. No? But we will still need some time to see how all this evolves. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for the questions, and actually to the speakers, because they're being very focused on their answers. I think we also have a question from Amaya Lopez.
Yes. Hello. First of all, I would like to present myself. I'm Amaya Lopez de Aguilar, and I'm a student of the double degree at Deusto University of Law and Labor Relations. And I would like to ask a question to Ana Gascon. And it's related to the fact that in recent years, the rivalry between China and the United States to become the leading world power in terms of trade has become fiercer than ever. We're constantly receiving Chinese production, and yet Western Europe still takes sides with the United States regarding areas like vaccines. Do you think that Europe's massive imports of the American Pfizer vaccines, despite the existence of alternatives as the Chinese Sinovac vaccine, is a form of favoritism? Thank you.
In fact, I believe that all these topics related to vaccines has its own geopolitical background. also, like a health and medical issue. But the point is that we are seeing that states are, focusing on this from very different perspectives. So, for example, the European Union has been highly criticized because of its strategy, and it has very bad, publicity in Asia-Pacific. Like, they don't know what they are doing. Look what they are supposed to be very advanced, and they have all these problems. But the point is that we have decided to approach this issue from a partly free trade perspective. Whilst the UK has decided not to do so, they have these contracts with their own vaccine managers, and they did not let Oxford decide with whom to do the vaccines, but they say, no, you have to do these vaccines with this company. And in their contract, they said, first, you have to provide vaccines to the UK. And when we have vaccinated everyone, you can sell to the other parts of the globe, the ones that you are producing here. It's different with the ones that are produced in the EU. Then United States has done the same, not through the contracts, but through the law. They have also this law that says we were not exports vaccines from the United States until we have used all the vaccines that we need. And then you have China, which has a completely different approach, and they have decided to do vaccination diplomacy. So, that a lot of people, for example, in Chile has been vaccinated with the Chinese vaccine, because they have thought that this, at the beginning, this was very bad for China, like the Chinese virus, but then they have turned around. And now, overall developing countries have a very good opinion on China since the last year, because they are selling all these vaccines, and a lot of countries are being vaccinated with Sinovac, for example. So we can see, like a strictly different approach, and it's not United States approach and China's approach, but we also have a different approach from the EU that only recently has started to monitor to where we export vaccines. So I think this is a very interesting way to look at how trade and other issues interrelate, and how some states put national interest before, or health interest, or trade interest, or their perspective of how they are seen through the world. But then I think it really depends on how you measure different interests, and it's extremely difficult topic, but also incredibly interesting from a geostrategic point of view. So we will see what happens.
Thank you.
Thank you to you both. I think Usue Anton also has a question.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly.
Okay, so hi, good morning. I'm Usue Anton, a second-year student of the law degree at Deusto University. First of all, I'd like to thank...
Sorry, Usue, please put on the camera, please.
I don't have it.
Oh, you don't have? Okay, then
No,
don't.
I mean, you can't see me. Okay, now?
We cannot see you. We can hear you. You don't have camera? Now, yes, we can hear you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry.
So, as I was saying, I'm a second-year student of the law degree at Deusto University. And first of all, I would like to thank all the speakers for the work done at this conference. And when it comes to the question, my question is directed to Rosa Ricoy. But first, I would like to put in context the question so we can understand it better. In sum, if something is clear, is that the society advances very fast, and as it is advances, different nobilities appear, mostly related to technology. However, the first cryptocurrency that began to operate was Bitcoin in 2009, and since then, other of different characteristics have appeared, such as Letcoin, Ripple, Decoin. So in case that a country's economy or even the global financial system itself collapses, virtual currencies have may be on hard. So what I would like to ask is the following: how do cryptocurrencies influence electronic commerce, and what is the main difference with other type of existing digital currencies?
Okay, thank you. I don't. Okay, thank you very much for your question. Bitcoin currencies, cryptocurrencies is a very important issue. It's an important type of currency, but at the moment, our in European Union is not considered a currency. And the difference between cryptocurrencies and, for example, a digital euro is that, for example, a future digital euro is under control of the euro system with little risk. Because cryptocurrencies.
Rosa, sorry, we don't see you.
Okay, I don't know why. Okay. Yes. Sorry. But because Bitcoin, for example, that is a type of cryptocurrency, is not regulated by any entity, for example, a government or a central bank, and is more secure. For example, with entities for supervision, control, and sanction. Okay, and with common regulation in the European Union and partners, it must be carefully designed so as not to affect monetary and financial stability. For example, limiting the amount of digital euros that can be owned by individual users, or, for example, to establish a penalizing remuneration for individual users, because a loss of, for example, 10% of the deposit of the clients of the banks in the most part of banks in the countries in European Union will raise the systematic risk to very dangerous levels. This is an important problem. And with a digital euro, for example, it's possible a currency convertible at par and with more strict caution than cryptocurrencies, okay? Because cryptocurrencies is by demand is a speculative asset and is not is very dangerous. And the problem is that China, for example, is testing its own cryptocurrency. Is the same state that created and People's Bank of China, but has been piloted in a lot of important cities in China and by important companies. And is a problem that technologies is supported by important companies in all over the world. That because this competition and this the expansion of fintech companies, for example, could make us in European Union and the USA, but in the European Union, more dependent by other countries, also other important companies, technologies companies.
Okay, thank you for your answer.
Thank you.
Marco, I think you have a question.
Yes, David. My name is Markel Berriochoa. I'm a student of Deusto. And I will also thank all the members who have taken part in this speaking. And my question is directed to Ana Gascon. that the agreement between the European Union and Japan places one of the most important focuses on the marketing of services, intellectual property, and electronic commerce. And both countries see the service sector as one of the key points for their economy, and as such have also worked to incorporate measures to ensure its good development. And my question on this subject will be the next one. Like, which part of this agreement will benefit the most or have the most interest in what has happened between the European Union and Japan, and also that the fact of free trade will cause tariffs to be eliminated so that some business sectors will be harmed, like which?
Thank you very much for this question. Truthfully, maybe Paula may be better to respond to this. But what is very interesting for me is that actually this agreement took a lot of time to be negotiated, and at the beginning it was not very wide-ranging as such, because it was known like the agreement of cars for cheese, because Japanese people wanted to sell us cars and we wanted to sell them agricultural products. And it was cheese because of the French, but then, for example, for Spain, for our wines, our pork products, our dairy products, it's gonna be also very important, because when we speak about trade, sometimes we think about tariffs, but what I would like to understand is with Japan, the problem was not really only tariffs. I mean, for some products it was, but for Japan, it was non-tariff barriers. What does this mean? It means that there are a lot of tests that, for example, when you wanted to sell oranges to Japan, they have to pass a lot of tests. So one of the ideas is that if these products are tested and are fine to be sold in our European market, they are also fine to be sold in Japan. So you don't have all these tests, because maybe you want to sell some kind of medical machinery and it takes 2 years to be tested and it's not up to date anymore. But again, something that you said is very interesting is that usually or traditionally when we spoke about trade, we always spoke about goods, but now more and more we speak about services, because overall for Japan and the European Union, services are very important. As developed countries, we all also want to sell banking services and so on. So it's a big part of the agreement, not just goods, but services. And usually the point is made about what are the benefits of the agreement. For example, as I said, for Spain, it will be our agricultural sector, but it's also it's gonna be more difficult for some companies to, get all the benefits because of the cultural problems. To sell to Japan, you don't only need a trade agreement, but you need to enter the Japanese market, and that's difficult. So even for the companies that could take advantage, it's not so easy to get into Japan. And then, for example, car companies in Europe are gonna they will have to be a lot more competitive, because it's gonna be way easier and cheaper to buy Japanese cars. So that's one of the sectors that was not very happy with the agreement, the car sector. And then what I want to say is that we have this agreement, we are not using its full potential. And as you said, I think the electronic commerce part is gonna take a lot of more importance in the coming years, and that's why I wanted to speak about this free flow of data, because I think it's something which it's gonna be very important in the future for our service exchanges.
Okay, thank you.
All right, we're almost running out of time. We have 2 more interventions though. So I'm gonna ask Usue and Cristina to please ask their questions to the speakers. So first Usue and then Cristina, and then the speakers to answer them.
Hi, and thank you all for your interventions. I want to talk to ask to the Professor Park because he has talked about the roles and strategies of Asean on the Belt and Road initiatives. So we know that the COVID-19 situation has affected all the international projects due to the global financial crisis it will leave and the reduction on the investment on foreign countries. So apart from that, I have read that this project has the opposition of the United States of America. So my question is, how does ASEAN expect to continue with the project and to make it viable in the future with this opposition and with the consequences that the project, that the COVID-19 will leave? Thank you.
Thank you, Ushua. I will also collect Christina's questions, and that way we can answer to both of them at the same time. Christina?
Okay. Good morning. Thank you for your interesting presentation. And my question goes to Belen. The cooperation between the European Union and China in recent years is more noticeable. As proof, we have the historic agreement first concluded in November 2019. So my question is, what were the events that led to the cooperation in the field of counterterrorism?
So Professor Park and Belen, we have like around 5 minutes, so 2.5 minutes for each other.
Thank you very much for your excellent questions. I'm very pleased to answer you. So regarding the pandemic crisis, the BRI would be affected negatively, pretty much and pretty strongly, particularly to the Chinese side instead of ASEAN side, because pandemic damaged the global value chains as well as the regional value chains. So many advanced countries such as the USA, Japan, and Korea started to move out their production hub from China toward ASEAN member nations, particularly in Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, and Vietnam. So due to the pandemic, the ASEAN member nations could be pretty much beneficial, while China will face high challenge, not only BRI, but also in general in terms of high technology sector. Because China cannot produce end products, the final products, particularly in high-tech sector, because China can produce only lower than 30% of core parts and components, and 70% must be imported by mainly Korea and Japan. So China will face in next 10 years, next decade, pretty high challenges and difficulties without highly sophisticated semiconductor products. China cannot produce high-tech final products. So as you pointed out, the pandemic era will affect the BRI either delayed or facing high challenges. That's my answer.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Belen, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Christina, thank you for your question. So in fact, as you are mentioning, the European Union and China does not have very pragmatic cooperation in terms of terrorism or counterterrorism. That is basically due to the differences in the normative and understanding of the cause or the countering measures and the threat itself, as I was saying. But it is a cooperation, you cannot call it cooperation, it's more an inspirational source of information for China, if that makes sense. Like the European Union has a discourse and China takes parts of that discourse to legitimate its measures within the country domestically. On the other side, more pragmatic cooperation is being taking place with other countries, in Central Asian countries, for example, under the context of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. I don't know if you've heard of it, but they are having military cooperation, for example. It's true that there's cooperation in terms of intelligence and information between internationally, more in a global scale, as well as police capacity training. Okay, so, but there is not much actual pragmatic cooperation due to the differences that we have. You know, the counter-terrorism measures are nationally constructed. So it's more like bilateral cooperation in any case, and more particularly with Central Asian countries.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. The time is up and it's getting late, basically, for those of you who are joining us from Asia. But I would like to conclude by thanking everybody and all the speakers and all the students and all the questions. I think it was very interactive. Personally, I've learned a lot about all these topics. I have left in the chat box the link to the Jean Monnet Network. So if you are interested in these topics, or you know someone who might be interested in them, please spread the word. We'll be posting there updates about the network. As Beatriz, the coordinator, said yesterday, the network is running until 2023. Hopefully, in the near future, with vaccination and everything, we'll be able to see each other, or some of you, in Bilbao, and to grab some pinchos. So again, thank you very much, and hope to see you, all of you, very soon. Thank you.